What's your full name? Because you know what? I don't even know your middle name.
Martha Lucille Anthony, but don't you call me Lucille.
You don't like Lucille? I love Lucille.
And the way I got that name was when I was born. Mama knew she wanted to name me Martha, but she didn't know what she couldn't think of a middle name that she liked with that. And my Uncle Shelby named me because he had a girlfriend at the time named Lucille.
And she didn't stick around.
I never met the woman, but she's my namesake.
I wonder what happened to her.
I don't know. He was just a teenager at the time.
She could have gone on to great things.
So.
Or nothing.
But there's no, as far as I know, there's not anybody else in our family named Lucille. I've never met anyone else named Lucille.
Cool. Tell me about your brothers and sisters.
Well, there were a lot of them, you know. Mother had three children. She's lost 3 children. My oldest brother only lived a few hours, and then she had Cooter, whose real name was Virginia, and then she had another girl that was stillborn, and her name was Vivian. No, wait a minute, it wasn't Vivian. That was the boy's name. Her name was something Bonita, because she named her after Aunt Baybo, whose name was Virgie Bonita. And then she had Cooter, and then she had Bud, and then I was born. And then 16 months later, Margie was born, and so we've always had a real close bond between us because we were both so nearly, you know, the same age. And we always could wear the same clothes and the same shoe size until she got to be a teenager and her foot got a little bit bigger than mine. And then she had Raymond. And then after that we had Hazel Ardeen, who was my little sister that died when she was 6 months old from pneumonia.
Oh my goodness.
And then we had John. And then we had Fritz, whose real name is Richard. Daddy was a great one, you know, for nicknaming kids. We all had a nickname. Margie was Midge and I was Muff.
Muff.
Yeah, and Bud's name is not Bud. It was it started out as Winnow, because Daddy named him after one of his brothers, and he got mad at that brother and changed it to Jim. Changed Bud's name to Jim. So he was named, you know, he was called Jim Owen then. And let's see, where did I stop? Fritz, Richard Marvin, who we call Fritz. And then we had Shelby, and he was born when we lived in California. And he would have been twins, but Mother miscarried one of them, and I can't imagine having 2 Shelbys in the family, because he was the honorest kid I have ever had any dealings with.
Hold on 1 second. And tell me about Billy again.
Well, Billy was our baby. He was also born in California. And Billy wasn't his real name. His name was William J.D.
Were y'all born in Dallas, or were you born in
I was born right down where Cedar Creek Lake is now. Just below that hill coming out of Kemp going east on 175. And over about a mile to your right there is where Mom and Daddy lived when I was born. And then all of us were born in Texas in different places. I'm not sure, I don't know where. I think that Mother and Daddy lived with Grandma Neal when Cooter and Bud were born, but I really don't remember. I don't know that. That's just what I've assumed over the years. But everybody else was born in California except Shelby and Billy. I mean, Billy and Shelby were born in California. The rest of us were all born in Texas.
Now you mentioned California. Why did y'all go to California?
Well, we were living in West Texas. It was, I was 9 years old, and we were living in Texas. We were living in the schoolhouse there at Gossett. We lived in the upper grades classroom, and another family lived in the lower grades. But Daddy couldn't find work, and so we moved to West Texas to pull cotton, pull bowls. And we lived out there in what had been a chicken house. It had cracks in it so big that the snow came through them when it snowed. Mama stuffed them with cotton. But we stayed out there until, I'm thinking, almost Christmas. But anyway, the bowl cooling run out. And then Uncle Ed came from California and moved us out there. And we moved to Winchester, lived there for a while, and then we moved over to Lakeview. And we lived there until I was 12. And then Daddy had saved enough money to come back to Texas and set up farming, so we moved back to West Texas. But that year the wind was so bad and the sand blew so bad that nobody made a crop, because this was, of course, for irrigation. And so we spent all of our money, and we came to East Texas and visited his brothers and sisters, and then we moved back to California. And we stayed out there then until I was, we stayed for a couple of years. I was either 13, I think I was 13. No, wait a minute, I was 14. We moved back to Texas again. We lived up in Northern California in the San Joaquin Valley, picked the grapes and tomatoes and picked cotton and whatever, was in season. And during all this time, we lived in this big old tent. It was a Navy surplus tent, and it was 16 by 25. And Mama kind of divided up into 4 rooms, 2 bedrooms, a living room, and the kitchen. And we lived in there. We had a dirt floor, and just picked whatever crops was in season. Then we moved back down to Lakeview during the potato season and picked up potatoes until we got enough money to move back to Texas. And this time we moved back down to East Texas. And we lived in various places down there until Mom and Daddy moved on the Shamley place, and they say they lived there longer than any time I can remember. And while they lived there, then I was 16, and they lived at another place over at Odom, and I decided to come to Dallas and get a job because we were so poor. When my sister died, which was when I was almost 16, she was killed in an accident, Cooter was, and Daddy had 35 cents in his pocket that time, and the neighbors took up money and helped pay for her burial. And we were living on Mr. Eubank's place, and he was so mad at Daddy because he didn't get to take care of her, and that he made us move. So we moved back over towards Odom, and while we lived there at Odom, and I turned 16, and I decided to come to Dallas and get me a job and see if I could help out Mom and Daddy, with some of the expenses. So I moved to Dallas when I was 16, and I stayed with Aunt Floyd May and Uncle Monroe for several months and got me a job. And then my friend Doris Anthony, who eventually became my sister-in-law, and I moved downtown on Irving Street with her cousin.
Oh, really?
Pearl. And I worked at Woolworth, and she worked at H.L. Green. And then the next year, Margie decided she would come to Dallas, and she was only 14. Or, no, wait a minute, she was 15. She had decided she had enough education, and she'd come to Dallas and get her a job, too. Of course, she had to lie about her age, but lying was never an issue with Margie. That was just a way of doing what you wanted, getting what you wanted.
Yeah. Was Dallas considered the big city back then, or?
Well, it was a pretty good sized city, and as I say, we lived down on Irving Street, which at the time was the red light district, but we didn't know that. We didn't know what a red light district was. And one time I had met this boy at work. He was a yo-yo champion, and they were having an exposition here, and he wanted to take me to the movies, and I told him where I lived, and he said, well, why do you live in the red light district? And I said, what's a red light district? There's no more red lights down there than there is anywhere else.
Yeah.
And it was about 9 blocks from downtown. We usually walked back and forth to work if the weather was permissible to save money. Streetcar fare, which was, I think, $0.10 at the time. But he said, well, that's the red light district. That's where all the prostitutes lived. Well, I'd never heard prostitute. If he'd said whore, I'd known what he was talking about. And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, yeah, they live at the Ambassador Hotel. That's where they work out of. And that's the main red light district of Dallasville. I thought, well, I guess that's why all these men were always accosting us on the street and trying to strike up acquaintance. They thought we were streetwalkers.
You just thought they were being nice. Yeah.
We was walking back and forth to work.
Yeah.
They'd come out of these bars and try to strike up acquaintance with us. And we were so naive, we didn't even know what they were doing. And I look back at it now, I think, how could I have been so ignorant? But I was, and Doris was too. She was even more ignorant than I was. But then Margie moved up here, and she moved in with us there on Irving. Pearl had gotten married and moved out, so she moved in with Doris and I there on Irving. And by then I was almost 17, and I had been going with Harvey for over a year, and we decided to get married. And
hold on for 1 second.
Or whatever apartment, they were big old houses that had been cut up into apartments. And we lived there for several months, and then we moved over into Oak Cliff. By then, Doris had married her boyfriend, Franz, and they lived in Oak Cliff with his mother, and they convinced us to move over there. So we did, because Franz didn't have a car, and we did, and he and Harvey worked at the same place, so they could ride back and forth to work together.
Now, you skipped over a big part of going to California that I wanted to ask you about, because my mom tells me that the road to California isn't like it is today, and that you actually took a wagon. You had a car, but you also had to follow it with a wagon. Is that true? Is that...
Not going to California.
No?
No. Now, we didn't have a car until I was 9 years old, and Daddy bought this old Model T from Uncle Lee that he had driven to California and back. It was a miracle it made the trip. That's what we went to live in we moved to West Texas in. And a funny thing happened going out there, because we were driving at night, because Dad didn't have a driver's license. And he felt like he'd be safer driving at night. He wouldn't be as likely to get a ticket. And this old Model T hoopy, it had a little bed on the back of it, which was probably all maybe by 4 by 4. I don't even know it was that bigger. But Bud and Cooter and myself and Margie and Raymond were all riding back there, along with the chickens and the dog and what we called our housekeeping stuff, our batching stuff. We didn't take any furniture. And so we were going through Ennis, and this was before they had sewers, and to drain the streets they had dips. And we were going through downtown Ennis, or residential downtown, I guess. But when we made a dip in the bed, that bed fell off that pickup. And this is in the middle of the night, mind you, where the kids was screaming and the chickens was squawking and the dog was barking. Made a heck of a racket, and the people turned on their lights and come out to see what happened. They thought we'd had an accident. We did, but it was a one-car accident. But they were the nicest people, Shane. These people lived in this beautiful big house there. They invited us to stay there on their lawn. We had quilts and blankets, so we just slept there on the lawn till the morning, and Daddy could take the truck and get the bed put back on it, and then we went on to West Texas. But I never go through Ennis, and I don't think about those dips.
You and Mimi are so close in age, but y'all are so completely different in personality. Why do you think that is?
I don't know, but Mother had raised 8 children to adulthood, and I don't think any two of us were ever really alike. And that's a strange thing. I have 5 kids, and none of them are alike. I guess that, it's really true. God makes each one of us different and gives us a uniqueness that's not like anybody else. Because I've often thought, you raise a family and you raise them in the same family. They all go by the same rules, have the same values, but they grow up and they're totally different.
You seem so nice and quiet and reserved, and you spent your life helping people, where Mimi seemed as mean as a.
She was ornery. I don't guess you would really call her mean, but she was very ornery, very opinionated, very hard-headed. Her and Daddy never could get along because they were so much alike.
Yeah.
And But now, she was more bonded to Mama, I think, than I was. I was more bonded to Daddy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was because I was so young when Margie was born. I was Daddy's child, and Margie was Mama's child, you know.
What was your mom and dad's name?
Dick and Sally Cravey.
Sally.
My daddy's real name was Richard, but he was always known as Dick. And Mama's real name was Sarah, but she was always known as Sally, and except to her brothers and sisters, and they never called her anything but Sis.
Okay. Let's start back with when you were living in Dallas, and what year did you marry Harvey?
In 1949. Wait a minute, let me think. I was born in it was 1950.
1950.
I was about 2 weeks past my 17th birthday.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What were the 50s like in Dallas?
Well, for me, it was hard work, but it was nice. I mean, I liked it, and it was, you know, it was so much better than whenever we lived in the country, because we had inside plumbing and all that. And of course, in the country, we had outhouses, and Mom and Dad didn't even have electricity until after I married. In the house they lived, they used coal oil lamps until after I married, and then they strung electrical wires over there at that house that they lived in, and they had electricity.
Isn't it true that your dad wouldn't use the restroom in the house?
He didn't like to. When they built their house, he bought land from Mr. Anthony, and they built their house over there on 175, and we made a bathroom in it, and he did not like using a bathroom in the house. He just did not think that was clean.
Yeah.
He preferred an outhouse, and so he had an outhouse. And he used that until for a long time, and then he finally decided it was okay to use the toilet.
I remember when I was growing up that after your dad died, everyone said that they could hear him in the house.
Mm-hmm. Mama said she could hear Daddy in the house.
Mm-hmm. And Mimi and my mom said that also.
Well, I never ever did, but I've never ever believed in spirits like Mama and Margie did.
Mm-hmm.
And Mama firmly believed in spirits, and Margie did too. And I suppose that I'm not going to say they're not spirits, I just never ever met one.
Never met one, huh?
Never met one.
Yeah.
But Mama spoke many times that she heard people at night, you know, when there wasn't footsteps and things, when there wasn't anybody there.
Yeah.
She firmly believed in ghosts, and Margie did too.
What was this neighborhood like when you moved into it?
This neighborhood here,
Mm-hmm.
it was like the country. There weren't but about 3 houses
Really?
between here and 175. People still had livestock, cows and horses and chickens and stuff like that. And of course, air conditioning hadn't been invented then. And so we just slept, you know, with the windows open, the doors open, never locked the door. We went to the store or something other, we just went.
Mm-hmm.
And never locked our cars or anything. It was a lot different than it is now. But it was more like being in the country than anywhere else. And I always thought that's probably why we bought this lot, because it was so close to 175, and 175 led home.
Yeah. Tell me about your children.
Well, as you know, I have 5.
Mm-hmm.
Alan, Dennis, Ann, Jerry, and Kevin. And I was so glad when Ann was born, because it felt like I was surrounded by males, having 6 brothers, then 2 sons, and my husband. I was so happy when she was born, because I had a female in the house, and you know, whereas I'd had all those brothers, you know, because all of them from Raymond on down was boys.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very happy when Ann was born, and then we had Jerry and Kevin, and we built this house here where we had it built. We bought the lot and paid for it, and then we bought the house built. And when we built this house, it cost us $4,200, and the payments on it were $45 a month. And so, but we had to take out a second loan and a lien in order to get it, because the loan company wouldn't, a loan book company wouldn't build it unless we had a 7 lien. So we had a second lien, and we paid $15 a month for that. So it was altogether, the house payment, including the insurance for it, was $59 a month.
Wow.
I bought several cars since then that cost more than that.
Yeah. Did you work during the time, or were you pretty much stay at home?
No, after I got married, I never worked. I was a stay-at-home mother, outside the house. Now I worked when the kids were small. I did dressmaking, and I did took in ironings, and I watched other people's kids, but I never worked outside the home until Kevin started school, and then I started work at the school, so I had the same hours as the kids did, and was off during the summer when they were out of school.
You have a long history with the Salvation Army. How did that get started?
Well, when they built the community center in Core up there on Elam Road, and when they were proposed that, a lot of people didn't want it because most people associate the Salvation Army with rehabilitation of alcoholics and addicts. And I guess they thought that's what they was going to be. They got a petition to keep them from building it, but it didn't pass. And they built it, and it was a community center. And so my boys started going up there. They were teenagers because they had a game room and all that stuff. They would meet their friends from school up there. And then Ann started going because they had this girls' organization they call the Sunbeams and the Girl Guards, and she was 10 years old, so she started going to Sunbeams. And I didn't even know the Salvation Army was a church. I thought it was just a recreation center. And because I never ever knew they existed except at Christmas time when I see them out with their little red kettles. And when I worked at Woolworth, our lounge was on the second floor, and we used to entertain ourselves during lunch and break by throwing pennies out the window and see if we could hit those kettles, those people out there collecting. But I was a den mother at the time, and the den mother and I were having a planning meeting up there one day, and I asked her what church she went to, and she said, "Oh, I go to church here." And I said, "This is a church?" And she said, "Yeah, the Salvation Army is a church." And I said, "Well, I never knew that. I really didn't know that. I thought they were just a social service agency that helped people out, with things and stuff like that." So then shortly after that, I said, Ann started going to Sunbeams, and they invited her to come to church, and she wanted to go because we went to the Baptist church down the street, and they didn't have anything, for teenagers or young people other than Sunday school and church. And up there they had the Girl Guards, and they had the Adventurers, which is the boys' groups, kind of like Cub Scouts. And in fact, they did have Cub Scouts. They sponsored the Cub Scouts because that's where I had my den meetings. And they had all these other, facilities, games, and they had sports, basketball and football and baseball. And so we started going to church up there, and then that's how we started going. And I've been going there ever since, almost 50 years. And I get weighed and measured to see if they're developing normally.
I remember when you were a nurse and you gave me some of my shots.
Yeah, I gave most of my nieces and nephews shots. Some of them refused to come to my house even today.
Because of those shots, right?
Because of that shot business.
Yeah. So we were talking about you going all over the world. I mean,
I always wanted to travel. I enjoyed traveling, except I didn't like those trips back and forth to California. That wasn't traveling. That was, I don't know what you called it, but it wasn't my idea of traveling. 12 people in a car with 2 babies that's not my. But I always wanted to travel, and I think it's because I like to read. And I'd read about these places, and I think, oh, I want to go see that, or I want to go visit that country. But whenever I was in my late 40s, I had the opportunity and the calling, I guess, to go to Suriname and work in a children's home because, I like kids. And they're my favorite people. So I signed up for 3 years and went over there, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I had to come home early because there was so much dissension in that country. But that just whetted my appetite for world travel.
Where have you been?
Well, after Suriname, of course, I've been to Mexico and Canada. I had done that when I was still married. But my next trip after Suriname was Russia, and this friend and I, we went to this open air show called, what is it called? But anyway, it's a story of the life of Christ from the time he was born till the rapture. Till he was taken up into heaven. And we went down there to see it, and we liked it, and they were asking for volunteers to go to Russia in that, as part of that show. And of course, you had to pay your own way, but we decided we were going to go to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a Hispanic woman, and my best friend. But we saved our money, and she borrowed some from her kids, and we went to Russia with that group, as actors or extras in that show, and we performed in the Kremlin. And it was really interesting, and it was funny, Shane. It was just really funny. And while we were there, of course, we went to St. Petersburg. But I found out one thing I learned when I went to Russia is that how much different our country is than that country. Of course, it was very different from Suriname too. Mm-hmm. Suriname was like America was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But Russia was totally different, because even though they had opened up to let travelers come in, which they didn't do for years when they were communists. Mm-hmm. And they were still communists, but it was when communism was kind of letting go of them. They were allowed to leave the country, and people were allowed to come in there and visit. And it made me appreciate our country even more, to not realize how much freedom we had and how many other things we had that they didn't have, because they had terrible food shortages. You might have to stand in line a half a day to buy the food your family needed. But the funniest thing, and I laugh about this every time I found out that the finger is a universal language. I did not know that before. I always thought it was an American thing.
Yeah.
But we were riding the bus one day to the Kremlin, and the city was Moscow was just full of potholes. Their streets were terrible. And we hit this mud puddle, and a man standing on the sidewalk, and we hit this mud puddle, and it splashed water all over him. And he did this to his family, to the bus driver. And I saw him, and I started laughing, and Maria said, "What are you laughing about?" And I told her, and she laughed too. We laughed all the way down to the Kremlin about that.
That's funny.
At that time, I thought that was totally an American thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like the word shit.
Yeah.
They have shit in every language I've ever heard. And it means the same thing.
It means the same thing, yeah. Where else have you been?
And then my next trip then was, I guess, Australia. I started saving money when I started working for the city as a nurse and putting it back in a savings. They took it out of my check. As I remember, $59 every payday, which was every 2 weeks. And saving that because I thought someday I'm going to travel. So the next trip then, I met this woman, Edith, who's another one of my very good friends, and she had been all over the world. She was born in Germany, and she had traveled all over Europe before she came to America as a war bride, and she loved to travel. And both of us were, single women at the time. And so we were talking one day. By then I was in the senior citizens, and we were talking one day, and I said, I have always wanted to go to Australia. She said, I have too. She said, I've never been to Australia. It's one of the places I've never been. I said, well, let's just go. And when I had this annuity coming in from the city when I retired, that besides my retirement, I had this annuity from this money that I had been saving for these several years. And it was $3,000 a year. So we put our heads together and decided to go to Australia. And while we were there, we were going to visit New Zealand. And we were supposed to go to the Fiji Islands, but they were having a revolution or something at that time. We couldn't go. But that was the second trip. And then we decided to go to China. She had been before, but I wanted to go and see the Great Wall. Mm-hmm. So we went to China. And then since that time, we've been to Costa Rica I'm trying to think where else we've been.
You've been to Nova Scotia too, right?
Huh?
Nova Scotia?
Yeah, I just went to Nova Scotia this summer in Prince Edward Island. But Edith and I have been to Costa Rica together, as well as China and Australia. That's my telephone. Are you in there, Jada? We've been to several places together, and she's the best traveling buddy you could ever meet, because usually she's been this place before, and so she knows, about part of the country, and she can tell you about how it was when she was there before compared to how it is today, which is always interesting.
Earlier you mentioned when you first came to Dallas and you got your first job. Do you remember how much you were making?
The minimum wage, 75 cents an hour.
75 cents an hour.
Which amounted, after they took out taxes, to about $18 or $19 a week.
Wow.
And so I lived down there on Irby with Pearl and Doris, and our rent was $11 a week. So Doris and I paid Pearl $4 each, and she made up the other for the $12, or $11 to pay for that. And as I said, we walked back and forth to work, even though they had the streetcars, because it saved fare. And when you're not making but 75 cents an hour, you do that. And like I said, my main reason for coming to Dallas was to help Mom and Daddy out financially. And so I bought, coats for the kids. And Margie got the first one. I bought me a coat, and I bought her a coat at the same time. And that was the first new coat she had ever had. I had had one once before that Mama had bought for me. Well, actually, I had bought it for myself in California and paid it out on the layaway. But, I helped them out as much as I could. And besides the 75 cents an hour, you got one free meal a day. If you worked the morning shift, you got breakfast. You worked the late shift, you either got lunch or dinner. And that helped out a lot, because you can live on one meal a day.
Yeah.
And so, but that's what I made, I said 75 cents an hour, but thinking back, I think it was 72. But it went up to 75 during the time that I worked there.
I think a lot of people like to look at the 50s and 60s as, the era, like a really good time to live and social changes and things like that. Did you realize the changes that were going on when they were happening, or?
I don't think so. Afterwards, years later, I realized the changes going on, but at the time I didn't. I was just a teenager having a good time. And I got married, and I never thought about things like that. And then I became a mother when I was 18, and things like that never bothered me in the least.
Yeah. Ever since Mimi passed away, our family has, kind of drifted apart. Mimi seemed to be, the matriarch, and
she was the matriarch, the glue that held it together.
The glue that held it together. What would you like to say to your family after you're gone, so that doesn't happen? Because I haven't seen my uncles and aunts and family members.
Well, even after Mother and Daddy died, our family drifted apart. And I think that happens with a lot of people. Not everybody. Now, the Barnetts, for example, they're still a very tightly, closely knit family. And Bessie was the glue that held it apart for years, and now then, I guess you'd call Claudia the glue. They're both angels in disguise, I'm sure. But a lot of families that I have known have drifted apart after the parents died. And I know, we still were pretty united up until Daddy passed away, and then, there was a lot of dissension in the family. And then after Mother passed away, it just was like a dandelion, puff on it, and everybody went in their own direction.
Yeah, because I didn't even know that you and Mimi had brothers until I was an adult. I didn't meet Fritz until I was probably 25 years old. Why is that?
Well, it's a sad story, Shane. When Daddy was, getting up in years and everything, he came to me and told me he was going to make a will. He wanted all the kids to have part of his land. And he had planned to give us all an acre each as we, got ready to get it and build it, because Daddy liked to have his family close to him.
Right.
He was real close to his family. And I said, Daddy, I can't do that, because at that time I was going through divorce myself. I said, I just can't handle it. So, you need to pick somebody else, and he picked Fritz, which was a good choice, I thought, at the time. And, but I don't know what happened if went to his head or what happened, but before Daddy died, Fritz just wanted to be in control of everything that Daddy did.
Mm-hmm.
If, and Daddy was pretty cantankerous before he died. He was hard to get along with. If he was in the hospital, he wanted to be home. Of course, he'd get home and he'd be sick and he'd have to go back to the hospital. And it seemed like that I was the only one that could appease him.
Mm-hmm.
If he got sick in the middle of the night and decided to go to the hospital,
wanted
they'd
you-
call me and I'd go down there and try to talk him out of it. And if he wanted to leave the hospital, and try to talk him out of it, and sometimes I could and sometimes I couldn't, so I'd take him home. And then Charlotte, Daddy wanted Charlotte to take him to the bank one day, and she did, and Fritz just went bananas. If anybody's going to take Daddy to the bank, it was supposed to be him, not Charlotte. So he got really upset about that, even to the point that he brought to his wife, Sherry over there to give Charlotte a whipping, and they had the darndest fight you ever seen right there. And Daddy, it's a wonder Daddy didn't die of a heart attack. Luckily, Mother was in the hospital at the time, and she didn't witness that. But, and then when John heard about it, he brought the gun back and was going to shoot Fritz and Shelby because he felt like they were the instigators of it, and Fritz was. And so then after that, they just stopped talking to the rest of us. Or I say to the rest of us, Margie and I, and Charlotte and everything. And it was just a mess. A real mess. And then whenever Mama died, and Fritz was supposed to have executed the will, he didn't. He let it go on for 4 years, and by then it was void because that's the time span on a will. If it's not executed, then it becomes void after that. But and to this day, Fritz still doesn't talk to me. Now Shelby did finally start, having conversations with me, and we got back on good terms again. But Fritz never has.
Oh, that's too bad.
And it's really sad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad because of the heartache, and it's sad because of the fact that Mama's and Daddy's estate was never settled. Mm-hmm. And it never will be, because now there's too many people involved in it, because as each child died, then their children became heirs until there's so much involved in it that there's just no way to settle anything.
Yeah.
And as I understand it now, it's going up for taxes. I think this month somewhere, Danny Perkins told me the last time he was up here working on my air conditioner that it had been put on the auction block, and he was going to bid on it, which I think would be a wonderful thing. I'd love for Danny to have it.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think, mostly an investment for him, because he has a lovely house down there at the lake, as well as several other properties. But and I hope that he gets it, because I think it would be good. I'd rather him to have it than a total stranger.
Mm-hmm. Right.
A heartbreaking thing to me, because Fritz didn't execute that will, because Mama had $26,000 in hospital bills when she died. And of course I had signed off on those bills, being the one that took her to the hospital and everything. And I think it would have been a good thing to sell the place and pay those bills off, which was what the will stated should be done. And then if anything was left, it was to be divided between the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Bud is the only one that got anything, and Daddy had already given him his acre, and he had put that trailer house, well, he had built that house on it, and then eventually Darrell had a trailer house there, but that wasn't important to me. The thing that mattered to me was that was the first land that Mother and Daddy had ever had and built a house on.
Mm-hmm.
And it meant so much to them. I would have liked for it to stay in the family. And actually, I have said this, and I still say it, Fritz should have been the one that got the whole kit and caboodle.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was his money from the time he was in the Navy that Daddy used to buy the land.
Yeah.
He never ever would have been able to buy it without that allotment that Fritz sent them when he was in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And I told Daddy at the time that he made the will, and he showed it to me. I said, Daddy, you need to leave that place to Fritz.
Mm-hmm.
He paid for that place. And
Maybe
of
that's
course, we
the way
all
Fritz
helped,
paid
with
too,
building the
yeah.
house and everything, but he never would have had the land if he hadn't used Fritz's allotment to buy it. And so I've always said, and still do, that place should be Fritz's.
Yeah.
But that wasn't what he felt like needed to be done with it, so he didn't.
Yeah.
And so it's just become a mess. Like I say, the state finally took it over and sold it for taxes, put it up for the taxes, and as the last time I looked or inquired about it, the taxes were about $2,500.
Mm-hmm.
When Mama first died, I mean, right after she died, I paid the taxes on it for several years because, you know, she didn't have any money to pay them. And then they built those schools down there, and they got so high I couldn't afford to pay them.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you is that our family claims to have ties to Jesse James, and it seems a lot of families in America seem to claim the same thing. How do you feel about that? What do you know about that?
Well, I don't know about it except hearsay, you know, what I've heard. The first I heard about it was when I was just a kid, and Uncle Lee used to take us all to the movies on Saturday night. Aunt Lovey loved the movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so he'd fill up his pickup truck or whatever he had to drive and take us to the movies, and we saw this movie about Jesse James, and Aunt Lovey was furious. Of course, they showed him as a bandit and a robber and a bad man and all that stuff. Aunt Lovey was beside herself. She was so mad because she said, "That's not the way my daddy was." And I said, "What do you mean your daddy?" And she said, "Jesse James was my daddy." And I said, "I thought his name was Neil." She said, "Well, that's the name that he used." And that's the first I heard about it, you know, and I thought, well, how interesting. So I tried to find out as much as I could, but after she got over her mad, she didn't talk about it anymore. But I've heard that since then from other people, like Aunt Babe Bo, for instance. She firmly believed that Mr. Grandpa Neil was Jesse James.
Wow.
Because when Grandpa Barnett lived down there in that area where they lived, he one time one of his kids was real sick and he didn't have the money to take him to the doctor. And he went to Grandpa Neil and told him, now this is what Aunt Babe told me, you know, that one of the children was sick. I think that it was Aunt Mary Lou, because she was sick a lot when she was growing up. It may have been Aunt Babe. But anyway, Mr. Mills said, well, I can fix that. And he left the house and was gone for a few hours and came back and gave Grandpa Barnett money. And everybody felt like, I mean, so according to Aunt Babe, that he had money hidden down there around this place, you know, because anytime they got into a tide, he managed to come up with money. And so I don't know if he was really Jesse James or not, but I know that Aunt Lovey certainly believed he was. And I asked Daddy about one time, and he said it wasn't anybody's business, and he wasn't talking about it. Of course, Mr. Neil was not Daddy's biological father. His name was Cravey. But I know that Aunt Lovey firmly believed that he was Jesse James, and Aunt Babe did. And there probably were others that did, but I never ever had the opportunity to talk to them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's Jesse James or not, and I never ever met him, but I think he must have been a good man because he was willing to help people that you know, was as poor than he was when he was still living. And that's what the true story, according to Aunt Lovey and Aunt Babe, was what he did whenever he was alive, and he was robbing trains and giving the money to people that needed it. He was like a Robin Hood. And so that's the way I see him, as a Robin Hood, because it's documented. I mean, I have talked to people that witnessed the fact that he gave people money that needed it. And so I've never ever thought of Jesse James as a bandit or a bad man, you know, because of the stories I heard about Grandpa Neil being Jesse James.
Right. You know, it seems like we talked on the phone the other day, and that so many of your non-biological grandchildren consider you like a grandma.
Yeah. Cole always called me Grandma. And that was fine with me because, you know, he's a nephew, and he's related to me on his daddy's side, and but he always referred to me as Grandma, and still whenever he talks to me, he refers to me as Grandma.
Yeah.
And then I've had different kids that lived with me growing up that weren't my biological children, The first was Elise, whose mother deserted her when she was 14.
Uh-huh.
And she lived with me until after she graduated from college. Of course, she didn't live here during her college years because she was going to Austin College in Sherman, and she lived up there. But she never, well, she called me Grandma sometimes, but most of the time she called me Miss Anthony. And then later on, well, actually before Elise didn't have any connection with me, another girl that came through me through the church, her mother had passed away and her family had broken up. And so the pastor's wife or the officer's wife had her living with her. Then she and her husband marriage failed, and Elise wanted to stay here in Dallas and go to Tyler Street Christian School, which she had been going to until she graduated, and she was a junior at that time, so I told her she could live with me until she graduated, and she did, and then she went into the military. But lived with me off and on most of my life, you know.
Do you prefer to live alone, or do you prefer having somebody?
Well, right now, I really prefer to live alone. I mean, it's not that I don't like people. It's just that when you're alone, you can do what you want to do when you want to do it, and you don't feel obligated to meet anybody else's needs other than your own.
Right.
If you want to, you can, but if you don't feel like it, you don't have to. You don't feel obligated to do it. Like I said, various people live with me. I've had roomers that rented my front room. Everybody from Miss Olivia, who was a very nice lady of color that lived there for several years, and then my brothers John lived with me, and Raymond lived with me, and
well, we lived with you a lot.
Yeah, Shane and Donna have lived with me, and Maverick and his first wife, Mary lived with me, and so I've just had people in and out, and basically that was because I was just so grateful to have a home that I could share with people that didn't have one. And I could have people living with me right now.
Yeah.
You know, Jared lived with me for 2 years, and then sued me.
Yeah.
And I was glad that he did that for his
righted
sake.
his wrong, yeah.
But it really didn't matter to me because it wasn't the dollars that I had.
Yeah.
That meant anything to me.
Yeah. A lot of people have opinions about kids today, and their technology, and consider them lazy and not as focused. Do you see kids today much different than kids, in the past, or do you think everybody has their own?
I think a kid is a kid is a kid.
Yeah.
When I was in Suriname at the children's home, there was a little boy there. Do you remember, what was that black man that used to work for your mother? Charlie.
Charlie, yeah. Charlie Draper.
Charlie Draper was the honorest man I ever had any dealings with. He was not above going out and disconnecting the wires on my car so it wouldn't start as a joke, or eating my lunch if he could find it. He was ornery. And there was a little boy in that children's home named Robbie. And if I didn't know better, I would say that he was a direct descendant of Charlie Draper. That was the honoriest kid I have ever had any dealings with. Now, I loved him dearly, but he was ornery. And he would do anything that possessed him, from stealing mangoes on the way home from school to the matron of that home, one of her favorite punishments for Robbie, and he got punished for something every day, locked him up in the upstairs kitchen, so he crawled up in the cabinet and pooped in them.
I remember when we were young and we were being ornery, Mimi would threaten us that she's going to drop us off at Buckner Orphanage.
Yep, that was a famous threat.
Yeah.
But and Buckner wasn't really, at one time it was an orphanage, but in later years it was just for children whose parents, for whatever reason, could not keep them.
Yeah.
But that was one of my major threats.
Yeah.
And it usually worked.
That's funny. Let's see. One of the interesting things that I don't know a whole lot about is the relationship between Margie, Mimi, and MW and my mom's real dad. Do you know much about that whole situation?
It was real funny when your mother. Well, it wasn't funny. It was tragic, truly. Margie was pretty wild when she was young, And I worried about her constantly because she was just wild. That's all there was to it. Her main interest in life was dancing and having a good time. And that's what she did. And I told Mama, I said, I'm worried about Margie. I'm afraid she's going to get killed because she will go from, she'd walk from where we lived down on Irving up to the nearest nightclub, which was also up there on Irving and Forest. And I forget the name of it now. But she'd walk down there by herself at night to go dancing because that's what she liked to do. And I just knew somebody was going to kill her. But whenever she got pregnant with Donna, and she told me, and she said, I don't know what I'm going to do because, I don't have any money or anything like that. And I said, well, whoever got you pregnant needs to take care of you. And she told me who it was. And so I called Les. She gave me his phone number, and I called him. I said, if you don't want to be charged with statutory rape, I said, you had better come over here and talk to me. Because my sister is pregnant by you, and somebody has got to take care of her.
Yeah.
So he came over. It was so funny. Shane, he was so nervous. He was smoking, and he was so nervous that the cigarette burned down and burned his fingers. He was just shaking so. And I told him, I said, I don't know how you're going to do it, but you have got to take care of Margie.
Yeah.
I said, because she cannot go back home. My parents have got all they can take care of. And I can't support her because I don't work. Only my husband works, and we can't support her. So you've got to take care of her. And I said, if you don't, we will either charge you with statutory rape because she is a minor. She was 16, I think, at the time. Maybe, but she was definitely a minor. I said, and if that doesn't work, I said, my daddy and my grown brothers will come up here and literally beat you to death. And I guess he believed me.
They probably would have, too.
Well, yeah, they probably would. I don't know if they would or not, but it scared him. He believed it. And so he moved her in with him and his wife to take care of their kids while they worked. Now, can you imagine that?
No.
I can't imagine your mother forgoing, but I mean, or your Mimi forgoing, because I would have thought that would have been the last place I'd wanted to go.
Yeah.
But that's what she did. She took care of those two children. They had two children at the time, and his wife, Donna, whom your mother was named after.
Oh my goodness.
She took care of those kids, and he took care of her medical bills. And that's how it worked out.
And how did she end up being married to M.W.?
Well, she married this man by the name of Maddox first because, for convenience sake, so that Donna would have a last name other than Margie's. Because back in those days, that was a terrible disgrace.
Yeah.
And she met M.W. the same way she met Les, honky-tonking.
Yeah.
He was playing in a band at the Manhattan Club.
Now, M.W. and Les played in the same band.
Yeah, they were good friends. Les worked for M.W. As a salesman later on when they had that moving business. And he had married somebody else then, and I think they had 6 kids. Had a whole house full of kids. And one day he came in his office and he said, could you sew this button back on my shirt? And I said, well, can't your wife do that? And he said, she cannot sew. Said, now she's a good mother and she's a good wife, but she cannot sew. And I didn't have any, I had a needle in my purse, but I didn't have any white thread. So I used dental wax, dental floss to sew that button back on his shirt. Because he was a salesman, and he always prided himself on looking good. And, and he didn't want to go out meeting people with a button off his shirt. Yeah. But that was so funny.
Well, we're almost done with this. Is there anything that, suppose somebody sees this video 10, 15, 20 years down the road, what would you say is your proudest moment, your proudest achievement, or what would you like to say to them to give them advice? Do you have any advice you'd give to?
Well, I don't know that I have a proudest moment. I'm thankful that I'm a Christian, and I love my church family almost as much as I love my biological family, because they have stood behind me in good times and bad. But I guess the most thankful thing that I'm for, and my proudest achievement, is my children. They all grew up to be decent citizens and took care of themselves, met their own needs.
Took care of their children, yeah.
Took care of their children. There have been things that they have done in their life that I was ashamed of, but once you get them grown, they do what they want to do, and there's not a lot you can do about it except pray and grit your teeth and hope that things turn out.
Now, you seem so happy. Is there a secret to living a happy life? Is there?
Well, I think anybody that believes in God and His goodness is going to be happy, because He is good, and He will take care of you. I know that for a fact, because He's taken care of me many times. But that's the only thing I contribute it to, is that, is my faith.
Well, I know a lot of people love you, and we love you so much, and you're like a saint to us, because you've taken care of so many people in our family. You've taken care of so many people that you don't know, and so many members of the community, and so many people in other countries that you have never met before, have never seen before, and you're willing to do what you can to help them. So, I hope my kids grow up to be anything like you. Would make me proud. So, just wanted to thank you for being you, and being so kind to us all these years, and we really love you. We want you to know that.
Shane, you're about to make me cry. And I don't look good when I cry.
You don't look good when you cry?
My nose runs and my eyes get red.
Well,
but
you've been like a Mimi to me, too.
I think that you've done very well with your children. And I have no doubt that they'll grow up to make you proud. And I think that regardless of things that children do, sometimes it breaks their heart, and they do. I heard a saying one time. It said, when your kids are little, they step on your toes. When they're big, they step on your heart. And I have found that to be true. But they're still your kids. Whatever else happens, these are still your children. God don't give up on us. Why would we give up on our children? They're still ours. They're still part of us. And they always will be. Whatever happens or whatever they do or anything, they're your children, just like we're God's children.
That's right.
He never gives up on us. We shouldn't ever give up on them.